Navigating the Digital Jungle with Sue Atkins and friends.
Today, I'm delighted to put a podcast in the spotlight. We've got Kelly Shungu from Women in STEM podcast. It's an award-winning podcast, so we're going to ask Kelly all about it. Welcome and thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us about your recent award. What's that all about and how did that come about?
Yeah, so I recently got awarded Best Technology Podcast by Women in Podcasting. And this was a global recognition. So I was nominated with other women who were from around the world. And for me to win this award, people had to vote for me. And so had people from around the world vote for my podcast.
Well, that is quite awesome. So congratulations to you. That is really no mean achievement.
Yes.
So tell us, what inspired you actually to start your podcast in the first place? And what's the mission or the message behind it?
So what inspired me to start my podcast was the fact that I had graduated, and I graduated during lockdown. So you can imagine during that time that there wasn't really much socializing happening. And I was applying for jobs, and I wanted to understand the experiences of other women in STEM.
Yeah.
And so I created an online community. And in this online community, we were having conversations, really insightful ones. They were talking about topics such as menopause, pregnancy, maternity leave, things that were never spoken about during my time at university. But I understood that at some point it was going to impact me as well.
Yeah.
And we were having these great conversations, and I eventually got a job. And so I couldn't have enough time to constantly be communicating with these communities. I thought, how best can I record these conversations and make it available for the public?
Yes. It's so interesting how things evolve and how something grows. And look what happens. You end up winning an award as well. Tell me this. What are some of the biggest challenges that women face in the tech industry today? And how do you see them being addressed?
I think some of the big challenges for women in tech is that there's still not many of us. So it can be a bit difficult for people to understand our experiences. And some of the barriers that we have is around, as I mentioned before, maternity leave, pregnancy. These are things that really impact women and can sometimes be a barrier in their career for them making the progression that they need.
Absolutely. So how can people address it? We know it's there. What can people do to try and make a change?
Yeah, so in workplaces that I've worked at, as well as in other workplaces, there are like women networking groups and women hubs, and these women hubs focus on issues that affect women and how to integrate it into the workplace. So for an example, in one of my workplaces, they were advocating for there to be a breastfeeding room for women. And this is something that most people won't even have thought about, and it can be quite taboo. But this is something that affects women and is something that we need to have recognized as well in the workplace. So I think acknowledging the issues that impact women and enabling them to have a voice in the workplace.
And that's what really navigating the digital jungle is also about, trying to help families and women in particular, maybe, as well as dads, of course, we're including all of that, navigating the difficulties and the juggling and the challenges that tech can offer, as well as the downside to tech and some of the difficulties that it challenges families with too. How do you think parents can support their daughters in pursuing careers in tech and other STEM fields? Because I think that's really important.
Yes, that is very important. And up until recently, it wasn't something that I had thought much about. But on recent episodes of my podcast and in my upcoming season, I've actually been seeing men coming on the podcast with their daughters, with their young daughters.
Wow. Oh, how fantastic.
Yes.
Great.
It's nice seeing how the daughters are really enthusiastic and they're still very young and that they're involved in STEM projects.
That's brilliant because you start the ball rolling with young children, don't you? Talking about it, aspiring to it, and bringing on dads as well. How interesting. Where can they actually right now find Women in STEM podcasts so that they can listen into this season with these interesting guests you've got?
Yes, so my podcast is available on all major streaming platforms. So that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, you name it, YouTube, and it's called the Women in STEM podcast.
Wonderful, because people are going to look out for that. In your experience, what digital tools or resources are most beneficial for empowering women in tech?
Ooh, that is a tricky one. I think that it can be on a case by case basis, depending on the individual. Some of the tools that I found really useful is organizations that I'm a part of. So,
Right.
a part of an organization called Coding Black Females. I'm also part of WES, which stands for Women Engineering Society. And these different societies host events that enable women to speak openly and have questions answered, such as how they can make career progression in their workplace, how they can acknowledge the fact that they might be mistreated and which way they can best go about it. And so having these organizations has been really useful. And they usually have resources available. For example, if you're a woman and you want to take a certification and you have a child, they have the ability to give you money for you to have your child-minded during that time.
That's fantastic. So we'll have to put this somewhere in the show notes, or can you tell people where they can go and find that resource? That's amazingly helpful, isn't it?
Yes. So if you typed in on Google Coding Black Females, they have
Yeah.
boot camps, courses that can be taken, as well as there's the Women in Engineering Society, also referred to as WES. They have a plethora of resources available, and they were a major part as to how I personally got started into engineering.
That is absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much for sharing that. Hope a load of listeners are going to go off and explore those two things. It's really interesting. What role then do you think that podcasts play then in creating a more inclusive and supportive tech community?
I think podcasts are amazing because you can hear from a wide range of different voices that you might not have access to in the workplace, for people from around the world. And having a global podcast has made me realize how much in common women share around the world.
That's amazing. I love your messaging. That's just so empowering for women and girls and daughters, isn't it? It's fantastic. And the role that podcasts can play in that, because it's so personal. That's why I love doing mine. You can be walking the dog, going for a run, driving in the car when you listen to stuff. And it's just so lovely. And it feels so personal, doesn't it, when you listen to a podcast, I think. What would you say is one piece of advice you'd like to share with parents raising children in a tech-driven world?
I would say to parents not to be afraid of technology. I know a lot of times parents are afraid of iPad children, etc.
Yeah.
Be some fear mongering, and there
Yeah.
is definitely reasons for parents to make safety precautions whilst using technology. However, I think it's very important for parents to introduce their children to technology and teach them how to use it in a way that's going to be beneficial. Because as the world is moving forward with the likes of AI,
Yeah.
technology is becoming an integral part, and
Yeah.
it's going to be a part of everybody's jobs in the future. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a huge
Yeah.
part.
Just is already. Yeah. Really, really interesting to hear your take on all of it. Your podcast is wonderful. And I want people to go and listen to your award-winning podcast because there's all sorts of things on there, past seasons and obviously some new seasons coming. Where can parents listen? You did mention it's everywhere, but is there a particular website that you have that people can go and explore?
Yes. So if they type in Women in STEM podcast on Google or any platform, automatically the different pages where you can find it will be available. I also have a LinkedIn page that I've created, which you can find Women in STEM podcast. And I do have a website coming out soon. Eye out for all of that.
Oh, wonderful. You're growing and expanding and making a difference. So I'm so delighted you joined me today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.